My name is Mitch Benson. I am born and raised here in Fremont County, Wyoming. I have my great-grandparents' farm out west of Kinnear. And I want to talk to you folks today about a journey that started for me about 9 months ago with some friends out on the Wind River Indian Reservation. We've been running feral horses, catching them, transporting them to tribal game and fish centers. And it's just been a blast, and I've got to experience a lot of great things with a lot of super people. But in that process, I started paying attention to things that were coming down through the new administration, with specifically the appointment and confirmation of a lady by the name of Deb Haaland, who's taken over as the Secretary of the Interior underneath the Department of Interior. And I got sort of interested in her as to her history, which is completely opposing my Western way of life: ranching, farming, hunting, spending great time in the outdoors. And so it's been a 9-10 month journey for me, and I just want to take you folks through some of the information that I've learned. So let me start with the beginning, which was roughly around March 15th of 2021. When Deb Haaland was confirmed as the Secretary of the Interior underneath the Department of the Interior. And on January 9th of 2022, the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, gave some remarks and a speech to the employees of the bureaus underneath the department. And I have her speech right here. And it starts off with Secretary Haaland delivers remarks to the Interior's Department as to the progress on environmental justice, where she addresses that she's honored to join the Green Latinos in the Winter National Summit. I don't even know what Green Latinos are, to be honest with you. But here's her speech. I would recommend that everybody read through this. It's rather interesting and gives you a lot of insight into the mind and the thought process of the new Interior. So let me set that one aside. And on September 14th of 2022, the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, USDA, Tom Vilsack, announced that they would be investing up to $3.1 billion into what they call climate-smart commodities. Now that one sort of really interested me. And so I went and downloaded it off of the USDA Gov's website. And you can pull up by state the money that they're going to invest in each one of the states with partnerships. And it's interesting because when you pull up Wyoming's, the first thing it talks about is measuring the climate benefits and emissions as to agriculture. I'm not really sure what that entails, but it's not good. But in the rest of these pages, it breaks down who their partnerships are, and such as the American Lamb Board is getting $5 million. Proximity Malt LLC, which is a barley company, is getting $5 million. And you can just peruse these documents. And the Milborn Seed Company is getting $35 million. Global Clean Energy Holdings is getting $30 million. The one that I found really interesting in here was Farm Journal Inc. And let me see if I can find it real quick. They are getting, well, I passed it. They're getting $40 million. Why would Farm Journal Inc. be getting $40 million? They're a publication company. Has the USDA bought their first publication company to write favorable articles about climate-smart commodities? I don't know. Sort of looks that sort of way. April 22nd, 2022, right before that happened, I was trying to decide where are they getting all this money from? But on April 22nd, 2022, President Biden signs Executive Order 14072, which is directing the Secretary of Interior to redraft policy for strengthening the nation's forests, communities, and local economies. On August 16th, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. There's the funding vehicle that is going to fund all of this climate change ecosystem programs. And in that Inflation Reduction Act, they're going to allocate $890 billion in total spending, including $783 billion on energy and climate change. Right there is the Executive Order 14072. And for some real interesting reading, here is the Executive Order, otherwise known as the Inflation Reduction Act. On January 19th of 2023, the USDA mandates the use of electronic RFID ear tags as the official identification for cattle and bison. This takes, and they gave six months to take effect. So this took effect roughly June 11th of last year, after the publication in the Federal Register. Now, what does that do? I didn't know, so I went and downloaded it. And it requires that all bison and sheep that are transported interstate, the only form of legal identification is the RFID ear tag. So if Mitch Benson wants to move his cows this summer to Nebraska, I'm going to have to register with the USDA. My farm out west of Kinnear, they will issue me a LID number. I will have to purchase the RFID ear tags, which are specific to my origin of location for my livestock in Kinnear. And I will not be able to transport or sell those livestock without the RFID ear tag if I want to transport them across state. The interesting thing about it was they gave the states and the tribal nations the opportunity to either opt in to this program or opt out. Still waiting to see where the state of Wyoming sits on this. On March 30th of 2023, the biggest document came down that is going to impact Mitch Benson's way of life as a public lands grazer. And that is the amendment of the Federal Lands Policy Management Act. This was the document underneath the executive order that gave Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, and her bureaus the authority and the responsibility to go update the Federal Lands Management Policy Act. It's a wonderful document. I've had to read it multiple times just to try and get through it. But what it does basically, right now we have 3 permitted uses on federal land, whether that's the Bureau of Indian Affairs out here on the Wind River Indian Reservation, whether or not that's the Bureau of Reclamation, whether or not that is the BLM, or whether that is the Forest Service. That's all we have. We have public grazing, we have mineral development and oil and gas, and then we have the unpermitted use, which is for recreation and for the citizens of the United States to go out and enjoy these federal lands. On the Wind River Indian Reservation, they have the same permitted uses. They have tribal grazing, tribal mineral, tribal oil and gas, and then for enrolled members, they can go out and enjoy that 2.4 million acres for hunting, fishing, camping, trapping, whatever they want to do. Pretty neat system. Unfortunately, what this does is it creates a 4th permitted class of land, which is non-use. And the reason, and it's for conservation. And so what they've determined is conservation needed to be classified as a non-use permit to elevate it up to the same level of importance for grazing, minerals, and oil and gas. Now, the scary thing about this is they can go out and they can look at any land and they can decide, the local bureaus can decide if they want to preserve that land for landscapes, for ecosystems, you name it. And then they can grab up this land, they can put it into the conservation non-use permit category. But the bad thing about it is I make my living ranching. I'm not a corporate entity. I'm just an individual guy that makes his living off of ranching. And this gives the local bureau, specifically the BLM in my case, to go out to our Natrona Ranch, for which I do have some BLM underneath the Laverne Davis lease. And if they believe my BLM lease is in need of restoration, they can immediately yank it from me. And they're going to pull it out of public grazing, and they're going to put it in non-use conservation category. My understanding is the only entities that can bid on the conservation non-use category permit are approved environmentalists, conservationists, approved by the Department of Interior. And they get it for 10 years. After those 10 years, if the land is not restored, for which there's really no definition of restoration, and they don't really have to do anything but let it sit there and be idle, they get it for another 10 years. And it just becomes perpetual. So this is a document well worth studying because it has a lot of teeth in it, because they talk about how they want to protect the ecosystems, and the ecosystems have been so valued in fighting global climate change. And without those ecosystems, the world's going to come to an end. The planet's going to blow up, fly away. I don't know. So after that came out, on May 10th of last year, I had the opportunity, I just happened to stumble upon it. Didn't even know there was an Aim for Climate Summit. I had no idea what it was. But I went and found it, and they had brought in Tom Vilsack and all the USDA upper directors and then they flew in components of the USDA from the Western countries all into the United States, and they had what they called a COP28 conference, where John Kerry speaks at the beginning of it. And John Kerry specifically addresses the USDA, Tom Vilsack, as to the need to get agriculture on board with net zero. And Kerry, it's hard to watch him, but if you do watch him, he says that right now ag creates between 26 and 33% of all climate emissions. And if we don't get ag on board to achieve net zero, we will not reach net zero. He even acknowledges that by achieving net zero, that is going to impact food security, which is a buzzword that's been buzzing around for the last 3 years. Food security. Who would have thought? I never would have thought it. But he says it's going to impact food security, and it does have the potential for starvation. But these are risks that are worth taking, because if we don't reach net zero, the planet is going to die. I don't know about these people. I really don't. So that took place on May 10th of 2023. May 22nd of 2023, the Bureau of Indian Affairs out here on this Wind River Reservation sent out notices to all tribal grazers that due to the large number of feral horses running loose on the reservation that were damaging the Bureau of Indian Affairs wildlife habitat, not rangeland, habitat, that the BIA was going to start reducing the animal units per month tribal ranchers can turn out on their grazing permits. And leading up to 2025, they may continue to reduce the AUMs, or they will not renew tribal grazing leases. That alone would be hugely impacting Fremont County's economy. Not to mention, in 1863, when Chief Washakie signed the treaty with the federal government to create the Wind River Indian Reservation, our government told those tribal members to lay down their spears, lay down their way of life, and become farmers and ranchers. And they've done it. And they've been awesome at it. And it's giving them the opportunity to continue their way of life to an extent. And now we have the threat of a bureau underneath the Department of Interior, specifically the BIA, telling these tribal ranchers that are ranching on federal lands contained within the Wind River Indian Reservation boundaries that they may have to cease their way of life. So, as impactful everything I've shared with you folks is, and scary to me, I couldn't figure out how the public, sportsmen, hunters, fishermen, snowmobilers, backpackers, I couldn't figure out why all of these federal documents weren't restricting their access. And I found it in December. In December of last year, the New York Stock Exchange submitted a request to the Securities Exchange Commission. It's 31 pages long, asking the Securities Exchange Commission to do a rule change that would allow the New York Stock Exchange to create natural asset companies. And how these natural asset companies could then be traded on the New York Stock Exchange, allowing both foreign and domestic investors to purchase shares in these natural asset companies. The Securities Exchange Commission granted a 21-day public comment period that went through Christmas and New Year's and was scheduled to end on January 2nd of 2024. I would like to thank 26 attorney generals that threatened to sue the Securities Exchange Commission if they did not extend that public comment period. So the Securities Exchange Commission extended that public comment period to January 18th of this year, 2024. And if it wasn't for some great Wyoming and Utah that I know of, personally know of, representatives, Senator Harriet Hagman, Secretary of State Chuck Gray, and I apologize, I cannot remember the Secretary of Treasury for Utah. They wrote scathing public comments and submitted them to the Securities Exchange Commission, where Wyoming would have lost roughly, depending on how you look at it, between 49 and 53% of the state's land mass to access. Utah would have lost 67%, according to Secretary Treasury of Utah, to its public access. And so when I heard about this, I went to the Securities Exchange Commission and downloaded the New York Stock Exchange request. I wanted to read what it was about. And it's all about climate change. It has literally taken the ecosystems that are contained on all federal land, categorized them and grouped them together in group classifications, and from those group classifications they were going to create all these NACs to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It's a pretty interesting document because if you read it, you would think that it was written by aliens. But they talk about the need to protect the ecosystems, and by creating these natural asset companies that would have the licensing agreements to manage these ecosystems, they will allow no extraction of any of the ecosystems contained within the natural asset companies. So when you think of ecosystems, you're thinking of the microorganisms working in the soils. You're thinking of the sage chicken, the cottontail, the jackrabbit, the elk, antelope, the deer. They're all part of the ecosystems as defined in this document. And if you can't remove these ecosystems, there's no hunting and fishing. There's no backpacking. Because when you backpack on these natural asset companies, ecosystems, you're causing them damage. I'm happy to say that with Chuck Gray, Secretary of State of Wyoming, Secretary of Treasury, I believe, in Utah, they wrote specific letters to the New York Stock Exchange, and 26 attorney generals threatened to sue the New York Stock Exchange if they didn't extend the public comment period. So that was critical because it would have ended on January 2nd. On January 17th, the day before the closing of the public comment period, the New York Stock Exchange rescinded this request. Now that's pretty crucial because all they did was they pulled it back before the ruling on January 18th. I'm thoroughly convinced it's going to come back. So I just wanted to share with you folks that our way of life is pretty well being threatened, for which I think everybody's pretty much aware of that. And for Mitch Benson, I thought it was crucial to get this information out. I know some of it's starting to come out. And I have a farm and a ranch that's going to go to my daughter if we can push back. So thank you, folks. I appreciate it. I wish you the best. Stay the fight. Stay the course. I hope we will prevail. Thank you.